Hi, am I alone here? Is it uh, is it just me? Let's see how we could see messages. I hope everyone is doing well and and wherever you are, you're feeling healthy and strong and good about the days ahead. Um, I thought, you know, there was a there was a serious life reflection moment that I had 2 weeks ago, and it was inspired by, it was, inspired's not the word, but it was brought upon by the passing of someone that made sort of a trajectory difference in my life, and his name is Omar Himmi Ait Omrar. And um, upon his passing, there was an article that I had about him that I simply shared on my Facebook page. Hey, Fatima Zahra, um, and and others, and I felt that I didn't quite reflect what Omar Himmi meant to me. And I think in sharing the period in my life that I had gotten to share with him and live in his home, I thought there were interesting stories that sort of reveal what life was like living for 2 years in the village of Amsouzerte in the Toubkal municipality. And I think sharing stories about Omar will sort of bring out um, stories of life and that may be meaningful to others. And so I'll begin. I think it's important to understand the sort of context of where Omar and the people of Toubkal live, particularly what the context was like in the early 1990s. It's a municipality in the most distant northeast corner of Teredent province. And it's so distant that its agricultural services were actually provided by the province of Ouarzazate. And however, the people who identify themselves as historically Glawi, they identify with Marrakesh. And so this Toubkal is really a pocket, a valley, a mountain area that's sort of caught in between where's is that Teredant and El House. Administratively in two places, but I internally from Dil Toubkal, Dil Marrakech. And so to get there, it was explained there was a Peace Corps volunteer that was about to leave Morocco, Brian Gay, and he described to me the whole lay of the Toubkal National Park. He benefited me in more ways than that, and I'm very fortunate to have overlapped with him. But what he explained to me was this, and which is the sort of the geographic and social situations. Toubkal, the Toubkal commune, they rely, there are 5 valleys that surround Toubkal, the national park, the mountain. And only one is on the south side. So you have Agundis, you have Wergan, you have Reya, you have Urica, you even have a bit of the Zat Valley is important. But on the south side, you have the Tifnut Valley, the Toubkal commune. And that's special because it happens to be that 50% of the national park is the Azib, the summer grazing area of Tifnut, Toubkal. So you have all these valleys, but one relies 50% on the national park. And yet no one from the national park from the early 90s, now of course, certainly there's a lot of communication, but up until that point, there hasn't been communication between the national park and Toubkal because you had to circle the atlas to get there. It was 24 hours, it's distant, it's remote. And also Peace Corps had never been there. And when we're assigned to Toubkal, we can live anywhere. And so when I heard this, that no one has ever gone to Toubkal from this Peace Corps, from Waters and Forests, from the national park, I thought, okay, I'll do it. I'll go. And so even though there was direct transit at the time, which takes 24 hours, I wasn't aware of that direct transit. So I had to take pieces along the way, and it took me 3 days to get there in the winter. And when people from outside Toubkal arrive, they always send them to Da Omar Himmi. And so I arrived after 3 days in the winter, and they took me directly to Da Omar. No one knew I was coming. And there I was planning to stay for 2 years. And I remember the first meal I ate at Da Omar was an omelet. Da Omar was an omelet. And after that, I immediately felt tired and illness. And it was an illness in my life that I never had. It was 2 weeks, unable to leave a room, and with hallucinations. I never hallucinated from illness before, and they were frightening hallucinations. Thankfully, I realized they were hallucinations, and I decided that I was going to try to enjoy them and just watch them as an observer rather than be affected by them. And it ends up that works. I ended up missing the hallucinations because I enjoyed this sort of movie reel of imagery. But in any case, it was for Da Omar, someone's coming, someone arrives, they say they want to live there, and he immediately falls sick and he doesn't leave the room. And it was kind of disconcerting for Omar, for anyone. It was very strange, especially when, I would feel at night his hand on my head. He was genuinely worried about, it was terrible. I honestly couldn't get up. Eventually, a couple of days later, a day later, soon after you say you're going to live there, the sheikh arrives, and so I muster enough energy to get up and sit up and ask him. Really, this was it. The entire conversation was this. He had my passport. I gave him my passport, and I said, "Will the people here be in the area? Will they be happy if an American lives among them?" And he said yes. And so that was it. I literally laid back down and went back to sleep. And what's funny, I say that story because many years later, the Sheikh, the Hajj Lahsin Lahmu, recounted the same story the exact way I just told you. And to him, it was, he said it was it was unforgettable moment because it really was, all I wanted to know was, would the people welcome me to stay? And I asked nothing else. And it just was a moment. But for Da Omar, what began to happen was the Kai didn't want me. I'm going on too long. Anyway, there's a point to all this, everybody. For Da Omar, it got more complicated because the Kai didn't feel the same way. He didn't want me to live in you know, what am I going to do there? Community meetings. What do you mean by this? It wasn't, you know, now when you say sustainable development to the people of the Ministry of, everybody knows what you mean. Participatory development. Everybody wants it and everybody understands what you mean. But then these were not welcomed words. You know, never then would we ever use the word empowerment or, you know, things that show um, movement or organized change. These were not, you know, these were well understood. And it wasn't part of Moroccan system and programs and laws and budgets and policies and constitution and all these things. So, so when the Kai doesn't want someone to live there and he's sick in your home and can't leave, Omar Himmi was, what do I do? You know, and it came down to this moment. And all of this whole story, and I'll tell you a few more stories, couple more. I don't want to, but this whole story gets down to this moment where they had convinced me that I should go to a hospital, which was in Teredent. I wasn't getting better. I wasn't really walking. I wasn't having energy. It was just, you know, and for me to accept to go to, it takes a lot. And so, okay. So I go to the transit that's going down the west, and I see in the back all of my luggage packed in there. So this guy's going to the hospital, let him go. You know, it would be easier for him. He has his stuff. But I knew in that moment that if I get into that transit, I won't come back. That it will be hard for me to come back. And I wouldn't go in the transit. And I turn around and I go back to lead to Omar's house. And I remember passing by Omar and seeing his face of like sort of stone, like, oh my goodness, he's not getting in the transit. He's going back to the apartment, to the house. And so that was our beginning. And I remember very soon after that, we worked out some arrangement where I lived there, and you know, I breakfast and dinner was with him, and with the home, and I would live there. And so there are people in my life in Morocco that made a huge difference in the beginning years in regards to work, you know, and that I'm not sure where I would be if I didn't get critical people at critical times in those early years. But the person that made the biggest difference in my personal life, that, you know, gave me a place to live and be, even when, you know, there was pressures that he was feeling that he ought not to do that, but he did do that, and he did it in the most perfect way, was Omar Himmi. And so it was a great. It wasn't easy. You know, he also got sick, the same illness I had. I guess it was a bacterial thing because he grew ill. He always, you know, sort of in the room, feeling my head, worried, making sure that there was esky for the, you know, the hot soup, making sure that there, you know, there was tangerines in season at the time. And wanting vitamin C, that was the only thing I would ever ask for. But we got through that. And so I'm going to share another story, which also sort of indicative of the times we lived in almost 30 years ago. One night at dinner, it was always just he and I. Of course, he was a grandfather at that time and became a great grandfather, passed at 103 years old. And to think when we were together, he was like in his 70s, that he to me was already an elderly. And so he had a long, beautiful, healthy life. um, he had his wife, and he had a daughter and a son. The son lived with him, Brahim, Allah yarhamah. Um, Brahim passed before his father, um, and uh, and Brahim had children. His first wife passed away. He had children with his first wife, and he remarried and had an infant child with a second at that time. But it was always Omar and I at dinner. And one night, in just talking about the people, and we ended up talking about the sheikh, and I had asked him, and when I repeat this to you, you're going to say, well, why is this so funny? But I had asked him, uh, are you uh, are you friends with the sheikh? And he said to me, uh, before he became sheikh, we were great friends. And we started to laugh. And him laughing made me laugh. And we laughed until we cried. It was one of those moments of laughing until crying. And that's not the end or point of the story. The next day, I go down to the village store, Hanout, who Mul Hanout was the friend of Omar. The owner of the store, they were very close. And so when I walked into the store, Omar was there, and I walked in the middle of him telling his friend, the store owner, the story of last night of when we laughed until we just broke down in, teary laughing. And when it got to the point of him referring to me, and I was right there, he didn't want to say how foreigner outsiders are typically referred to, or the word armoy. He didn't want to say that in front of me because it's not, And so he asked me my name. So I had been living in his home for, I believe, up until that time, it was 6 months, having breakfast and dinner every day. And he never asked me my name. Isn't it? And there is a warmth, you think about that in multiple ways, but can you imagine? So I'm about to say, how would we spend our time? I lived there for 2 years. Well, we would not just have breakfast and lunch, but we would sit together in the afternoons, starting around 4, around when the sun gets behind the mountain peaks, and just talk about his brother and when the Jewish people lived there, and his brother was a sheikh who was passed away in 1951. He was actually poisoned. He had a Jewish advisor named Bokarin. And so every day we would be talking and sharing. And, there is a warmth to the fact. I honestly feel that, it didn't really matter my name. I mean, I don't know. There's different ways you could see that. But I really choose to see it. There was a closeness that, there was no contract. There was no, let me see your passport. There was no, matter of, is he going to pay me on time, or where could I ever find him? There was no, there was just, it was just, everything was based on he and I on trust, and there was no need to, to learn more necessarily about what I'm about, where I'm from, my name, my parents, my background, where I lived. If it came up, it came up, and that was really it. It wasn't, and so he really was just accepting, and that's how I really sort of come to feel about it. Does anyone want to say something? Someone say something else. How about that? Hi to everybody. I see you. Hi, Sadie. Hi, Kamal. Hi, colleagues. Hi, Nina. Yes, unconditional hospitality. Thank you so much. Thank you so, which is really, really, really the truth. Thank you so much. That was it. It was, and I'm going to jump to the end, our very last conversation I had. There's stories in between I'll share, but what you just said, Nina, was our very last conversation a couple days before he passed away. He couldn't speak, but he could whisper to his grandson, Mohammed, and Mohammed told me what he said, and I would tell what Mohammed, and Mohammed would convey to Omar. And the very last thing he said to me was what you just said, Nina. His very last words to me 2 weeks ago was that this is your home. Exactly what you just said. And that, and he made sure, and he wanted everyone to hear that, that this is where it could always be a place I could be. And from time to time, over the course of the 30 years, it was a place where I found myself to be. There was something there whenever I was there that was soothing. So I guess I'm going to say, I'm looking at different stories I could say, but I feel like I'm talking a lot. But I want to say one that also I think has touched me, that I hope is meaningful in some way to you. Sheikh Mohammed, his brother, why was he was murdered by poison? And when you think about this poison, can you imagine drinking a cup of coffee that has such destructive sickliness that it turns your kidney to liquid and you could throw it up? That's how Omar described it to me. And it makes me really realize how the nature of poison, it's like we can quarrel any way in the world, but we draw a line at poison. And because of the sort of the hiddenness of it, the not just the treachery, but the sort of the cowardly deceit of poison. And why was he poisoned? Because he wouldn't let men marry more than one wife, marry more than one person. And he visited a village below Amsouzerte and had a cup of coffee, returned home. And I think he lived a couple of days, but died. He had asked Omar, I think it was the day after, at what point is the sun? And Omar said, it's at such a point. And he said, when it gets to this point, I'll be past. And now just think of this ongoing story of all the deeds and attitudes that Omar could remember about his older brother and his Jewish advisor, Bokharin, and the people at the time and what they tried to do. For example, they have a water source called Ure that flows north instead of south where they were, but it belonged to the southern Toubkal community. And so Sheikh Mohammed, unfortunately, was killed before they finished, but they were digging into the mountain in order for that source to flow the other direction, which would have changed the life course of 14 villages in that one project. Who to this day are suffering. They have to pipe water in from 8 kilometers away rather than having their own source, and which is it's not a sustainable remedy what they're doing. So it became a project that I really wanted to do and still do, and still we advocate it, and we've developed assessments about it. It's 14 villages creating an agreement between them, which took a lot of years for that to happen. So just think, and then I would go into my room after these conversations and I'd write in my journal the stories that I heard that day. And so after the 2 years, and I was soon to leave, Omar Himmi brought to me the small tea kettle of silver that Sheikh Mohammed would drink tea from with his wife. And with that kettle, only the two would drink tea. And it's a family heirloom. It's a regional heirloom, and he gave it to me. And of course, which was a hugely thoughtful gift. Now, that's not the story. The story goes on, which is the real story. I then brought that tea kettle with me and returned to New York. And I showed it to my family. I said, "This is the tea kettle of Sheikh Mohammed, and he would drink tea only with his wife. And Sheikh Mohammed tried to do the right things, and he was murdered for trying to do the right things. And he was inclusive, and and he meant what he was. And this kettle is, generations old, and look, and to others, it was an old, not particularly clean kettle from the mountains that, they had no affinity for, no use for, not particularly moved by the story. It was, and it was sort of clear that that kettle was entirely in the wrong place. It had its meaning was in Toubkal. And so it took some time, but it was some years. But the next time I returned to Omar Himmi, I brought him back the kettle. And I said, Omar, this kettle belongs here. And without a word, he may have just looked at me to make sure that that's what I wanted. But I don't remember any words spoken. I think he just really understood, and accepted me handing him the kettle, and that was it. Our relationship. I'm going to say one more story, and I think this is really what our relationship was. You'll see our relationship was for the other. I'll say one more story. At that time, the national parks hadn't done a development project for the communities that neighbor the parks, not just in Toubkal, but which is the largest, at that time, the largest and the oldest national park, which had more than 150 villages around it. But there are 10 national parks in Morocco. And it's a delicate balance to do a project with a community that neighbors a park, because the idea is to enhance livelihoods and education and health and opportunity and all good things in exchange for, or in order for, the communities to accommodate the park area. So it was always a development conservation linkage. And in 1994, 95, we had done a tree planting project. I think it was cherry, around 23,000 trees. Okay. So what did the national park do immediately after those trees were planted? They enforced regulations related to grazing within the Azib, but these 20-something thousand trees, these were just sticks in the mud, literally. They didn't make any difference. And actually, they take up land until they bear fruit. And so, the people haven't made any gain before they were experiencing regulation. And they felt entirely trapped and deceived. Furthermore, when you have historic right to graze in an area with your herds for more than 1,000 years, and for the first time you're regulated, they also felt as if they were, in danger of potentially even losing the area. And there was a group it was a municipality of 12,000 people. There was a sort of a constituency in that group that felt just that the national park is slowly going to take the land. It wasn't the majority who felt that, but they were a very vocal minority group that and spread fear. And there was even the concern that the people were going to uproot the 20 something thousand trees out of protest. And there I was in the village. It was the most uncomfortable days that I had, maybe professionally. It was days. I had an uncomfortable um, day, or probably more than that, which also happened to take place in Toubkal. But um, but this was a element of serious concern, and it really happened one day when the people were gathered. The village was sort of central in order to get to the souk, so people were gathered in the souk, and I remember walking in a way where that gathering could see me, and the level of um, dislike that I felt from all the people's gaze was very palpable. A moment I'll never forget. And you know, and people, it was a beginning. It was, you know, we have to get into a mindset where this kind of thing had never been done. There's never been this triad of balance of conservation and development. There hasn't been, you know, a level of trust building that there is that years provide. It was, and which is why we see all over the world that not only violence erupts, but there have been deaths as a result of these kinds of issues of national parks, engaging communities, historic areas, and not managed the well. And so tensions are a natural part of this, but you know, they can escalate. And so that evening, I saw Omar. Um, I would get up sometimes in the evening just to look at the stars, 12, 2 o'clock at night, and I saw Omar sleeping beside my door. And I knew that, which has never happened before or since, and I knew he was worried. The very next day, I left and went to Marrakesh, and the leaders, the community leaders, and the park representatives, and so forth, we managed a negotiation there in Marrakesh. But that was Omar. I mean, in the end, you know, did he have concerns probably about, you know, did he understand the national park and wall? No, did he? I don't think he cared. His only, I mean, you know, I think it was just about, it was just about two people, you know, and that's always all it was about. You know, there's been so many projects in Toubkal since, through the foundation. There's been so many in the 90s. I just, it's not even part of our, maybe if I was worried about something related to work or something, you know, very rarely would we even talk about it. It wasn't a relationship about that. It was just about how you feeling, you know, and how you doing, and you know, and making sure you're okay at night, and if you're ill, and you know, and being his, hopefully, you know, he endured great loss in his life. Um, I'll never forget when he described the loss of his 9-year-old daughter, and it, I mean, he spoke about her, um, and you know, the stories he would convey about her kind of shared the theme of how considerate she was of him, of others, her consideration, her thoughtfulness, um, which is really, you know, a reflection of her dad and mom, of course. And so the other thing is, and he lost her as a relatively young man, and then in his later years, he lost his son, who was only in his 50s, but lost his beloved son, Brahim, which you know, uh, that was always, something that you knew he was carrying whenever you would see him again. Um, it was it was it was almost like a new a different period in his life, those elderly years when following the son of when Brian passed away. So he experienced great hardship, and the sudden loss of his brother in that way. And um, you know, so much I could go on of the people of his family that lost tragically at young ages. Um, I guess I'll leave it at that. You know, if anyone wants to share anything, um, you know, I'd be glad to. I guess one of the things in all of our 30 years, almost 30 years of Omar and I, and he saw, you know, I guess that, you know, we talked about Bokarin, the advisor to his older brother, Sheikh, the Jewish advisor, and you know, sometimes twice in almost 30 years, he had seen what I'd seen the work or seen a comment that I made as being kind of in the spirit um, of how Bokharin would have, or how a Jewish, he sort of saw it as Jewish. Let me give you an example. The whole balance of, you know, gain of development and conservation, try to work out an arrangement of, you know, where everyone is happy. He thought he sort of called that very Jewish because of the way that the land worked there. So if a Jewish person had land, that land would be given to a farmer to be able to keep, I believe it was 80% of what was yielded and 20% for the Jewish owner. They didn't have much land. They were more into more merchants, but so here you have this sort of mutual win. The farmer gets 80%, the owner gets 20%. The owner doesn't have to work, the farmer works, and so, you know, they both gives up the land, provides work, and, you know, try to get both to benefit. That kind of mutual gain, he sort of saw that in the development conservation area, and referred to that as kind of being sort of in the spirit of Bokharin. The other thing was, I was looking. Also just the beautiful home of Omar. I never spoke about that, but they had changed the home over the years and built onto it and sort of it. But in those early years, there were two. Your Amsouzerte is at the head of a fork in the valley, and Omar's house was on this mountainside, so you can see on the terrace above, you could see the forks leading up to the tallest peaks in North Africa, up each valleyway. And we were looking down, Omar and I had saw another person named Omar, a young man with a yellow tagia, and next to him was an older man named Hussein, well older, with also a yellow tagia, but Hussein's tagia was perfectly clean, and Omar's tagia was not so. And I said, well, look how Omar, who's young, has a tagia that's not as clean as Hussein, who's much, much older. You would think with more time, the tagia gets more old, more worn, more, you know, less clean. And so you would think if it was about time, the older gentleman would have had a less clean tagia, but it was the younger one. And he thought he had heard Bokharin talk about, you know, trying to draw meaning from life from these kinds of observations. And but that in all the years, those were the two times he had, you know, it had ever, only if it reminded him in some way of the Jewish life that used to be in the region. And twice in those years, I guess in our conversations, he was reminded. I guess I'll leave it at that. Um, Toubkal is my final thought. Literally, my final thought will be um, the people whom I loved in Toubkal have generally passed, and so it's going back now. It's just it's not the same, um, and and it kind of now that we're doing many projects there, and when we go, we're uh, we're we're able to have a tagine, and we're able to eat what we'd like to eat, and mujur al khair, and all those things. And when I think of the people who I wish were there in those moments, it's they're not anymore. So it's sometimes hard to find meaning to go back, but I guess a lot all these things all of us can relate to in some way. It's hard to go home again. The people change, alhamdulillah, the environment changes, and last time I was there, I didn't see a single mule on the road, and it was all motorbikes. And I've never seen motorbikes. It was always mules. And, motorbikes have pollution and all these things, and it just was far less enjoyable to walk. And so, so with Omar's passing, it's about letting go, I guess, of a time. So thank you for listening. I am grateful for the life I had, and I got to tell Omar this, that he of course did change my life because he gave me a home, and a beautiful home, and so I let him know that thank you for uh, being what enabled me to stay in Morocco and serve. And I did let him know that whatever we've done, that it's, in my mind, he made possible. So thank you, everybody. So do I say goodbye and click end live video? I'll wait 5, 10 seconds. I'll wait as long as you want, but if anyone has a comment, did I bore you? Was this more selfish than generous for me to do this? Wait, maybe I need to scroll down. That's the problem. Oh, here we go. Thank you, Rashid, for sharing that film. Hi, Zach. Zach, of course, was able to spend very important, productive, helpful time in Toubkal, and of course knows Da Omar, as do so many people on the call. Amen, inshallah, Zach, bless his memory. Thank you, Sana, for the story. Thank you, Nina, for the encouragement. Yes, he's someone to admire, Fatima Zahra. It really is. And I mean, in terms of, if I could take any quality of his, he lived until 103. And so what, if observing his life, what enabled that? When was the last time you were in Marrakesh? And I think he said 10 years. I mean, he was, and to live 103 years hearing the running of a river. I mean, you hear the river in your home, and, you're breathing high elevation air. And so, and his diet was really, I mean, three boiled eggs of from Jejbildi, from free range chicken, and that was his dinner years and many years. And so he really just did the right thing. And I also think that he was very good at you know he he felt, he was sympathetic, he listened, he was empathetic, he was loving and caring, but also and and that never diminished his ability to not you didn't feel he was burdened. There wasn't a sort of stress. Uh, you know, there was his goals were uh, around him, and he was content and not wanting of not having to have more. You would never hear him think about, can I buy this or can I expand this or can I get more visitors or can I mean, never. It was more of mahabali came. Whatever came was sufficient, and he was satisfied. And that coupled with really thoughtful living and eating and I think lend toward a beautiful longevity. Yes, I'm reading what Zena wrote, and I'll say this too. I mentioned the Sheikh Haj Lahsin, um, and who also Lahmo, he passed away, and I had gone. He had diabetes and was blind before he passed, and I had gone to go see him, um, and you know, he there are things I could tell you about him, but it takes a long time to get into his heart, and um, and I think because of the emotions around the situation of park and people and projects and difficulty and understanding and all these things and trust and all, we've gone through all of that. And really, his last words were,